In the annals of military history, few sieges are as audacious, as ingenious, and as brutal as the siege of Tyre. In 332 BC, a young king, destined to be called the Great, faced an island fortress that had defied conquerors for centuries. This is the story of how Alexander the Great did the impossible. He marched his army across the sea. Before Alexander, the world trembled at the names of empires like the Babylonians and the Persians. The great Nebuchadnezzar himself had besieged Tyre for 13 long years and failed. The Tyrians were masters of the sea, their island city a half-mile from the coast, protected by towering walls, some reaching 150 feet high on the seaward side. Their navy was formidable, controlling the waves and ensuring the city could be resupplied indefinitely. When Alexander's envoys requested entry to sacrifice to Heracles, the Tyrians, confident in their island stronghold, refused and killed them. It was a fatal miscalculation. Alexander, enraged, was not a man to accept refusal. But how could a land-based army conquer a city in the middle of the ocean? His generals advised him to bypass it. It was impossible, a waste of time and resources. But for Alexander, impossible was simply a challenge. His plan was so bold, so unheard of it bordered on madness. If he could not sail to Tyre, he would bring the land to Tyre. He would build a bridge to the island. The challenge was monumental. The channel between the mainland and the island city was deep, with treacherous currents. Alexander commanded his engineers and soldiers to begin construction of a massive causeway, a mole stretching from the shore towards the island walls. The work was grueling. Tens of thousands of men began tearing down the old mainland city of Tyre, using its stones and rubble as foundation. They drove cedar piles into the seabed and filled the gaps with rock and earth. Progress was slow, and danger was constant. As the causeway crept closer to the island, it came within range of Tyrian archers and catapults on the city walls. They rained down a constant hail of arrows and stones on the exposed workers. The Macedonians built 2 large wooden towers at the end of the mole, mounting their own catapults to provide covering fire and shielding their men with animal hides to protect against fire arrows. But the Tyrians were not idle. They devised a brilliant and terrifying counterattack. They took an old horse transport ship, loaded it with pitch, sulfur, and all sorts of flammable materials. They weighed down its stern so the bow pointed high into the air. Then, on a windy day, they towed it towards the causeway, set it ablaze, and let it crash into the Macedonian siege towers. The fire ship exploded in a massive inferno, engulfing the towers and the end of the mole. At the same time, Tyrian ships swarmed to the site, their soldiers leaping onto the causeway to destroy what remained of the siege works. Alexander's first attempt had ended in fiery disaster. Did Alexander give up? Not a chance. He doubled down. He realized he couldn't take Tyre without controlling the sea, leaving his general Parmenion to rebuild and widen the causeway. Alexander went on a lightning campaign to assemble a fleet. He forced submission from the naval powers of the region Sidon, Aradis Byblos, and even Cyprus. These cities, longtime rivals of Tyre, eagerly lent their fleets to the Macedonian cause. In a stunning turn of events, Alexander returned not just with a rebuilt mole, but with a massive navy of over 200 warships. The Tyrian fleet, once the masters of the eastern Mediterranean, was now trapped in its own harbors, blockaded by a superior force. The tide of the war had literally turned. Now, with naval supremacy, the real work could begin. The causeway was completed, reaching the very walls of Tyre. The next phase of Alexander's plan involved some of the most advanced and terrifying siege weaponry the ancient world had ever seen. The Macedonians were masters of siegecraft, and they brought their entire arsenal to bear on Tyre. On the newly completed causeway, they erected siege towers taller than any seen before. These were monstrous, multi-storied wooden structures, bristling with catapults and archers, rolled forward to the edge of the walls. These towers were so tall they overlooked the Tyrian battlements, allowing Alexander's men to clear the walls with a barrage of projectiles. But the true game-changers were the siege engines mounted on ships. Alexander's engineers mounted battering rams and stone-throwing catapults onto the decks of his largest, most stable warships. These floating batteries could move around the island, probing for weaknesses in the walls. something a land-based assault could never do. The Tyrians fought back with ferocious ingenuity. They dropped massive stones to wreck the ships, used grappling hooks to snag the rams, and poured red-hot sand onto the attackers, which got inside their armor and caused horrific burns. They even built new walls inside the city wherever a breach seemed likely. For weeks, it was a deadly technological arms race, a relentless cycle of attack and defense, of Macedonian ingenuity versus Tyrian desperation. The noise was deafening. The crash of rams, the thud of catapult stones, the screams of the wounded. The sea around the island turned red. After months of relentless bombardment, a section of the southern wall finally crumbled. The moment Alexander had been waiting for had arrived. He planned a multi-pronged final assault to overwhelm the defenders. The main attack would be led by Alexander himself, from ships carrying boarding bridges, aimed directly at the breach. Simultaneously, his fleets would storm the northern and southern harbors, while his troops on the causeway would launch a diversionary attack on the northern wall. At dawn, the trumpets sounded. Alexander's ships, with his elite hypaspists, surged towards the breach. Under a hail of missiles, they threw up their gangplanks and swarmed onto the walls. Alexander was reportedly the first, or among the first, to gain the battlements, fighting with his men in the thick of the action. The fighting was savage, a desperate hand-to-hand struggle in the narrow gap. At the same time, his Cypriot and Phoenician fleets broke the booms, blocking the harbors, and poured into the city. Caught between Alexander's forces from the wall and the sailors from the harbors, the Tyrian defense collapsed. The city fell into chaos. The Macedonians, enraged by the long siege and the execution of their comrades, showed little mercy. The aftermath of the 7-month siege was horrific. The city that had resisted for so long was utterly destroyed. It is said that around 8,000 Tyrians were killed in the fighting, but the true horror came after. Alexander, in a cold fury, ordered 2,000 military-aged men to be crucified along the coast, a gruesome warning to any who would dare defy him. The remaining 30,000 citizens, women and children included, were sold into slavery. The great city of Tyre was reduced to a ruin, its power broken forever. The victory was a strategic masterpiece. By neutralizing Tyre, Alexander had secured his rear flank and the entire Mediterranean coastline. He could now march on Egypt and then into the heart of the Persian Empire without fear of a naval threat. The siege also had a lasting geographical impact. Over the centuries, sand and silt accumulated around Alexander's causeway, permanently connecting the island to the mainland. The island city of Tyre is now a peninsula, a lasting, physical testament to Alexander's indomitable will. The Siege of Tyre stands as a defining moment in his career, a brutal, brilliant, and unforgettable epic of ancient warfare that cemented his legend as a commander who could reshape the world itself to achieve his goals. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to the ancient world. If you enjoyed this story of epic engineering and conquest, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales from history. We'll see you next time.